Hello and welcome to this next module where we're going to be covering the starting up a project process. If you'd like to follow along or review alongside with your manual, you need to be looking at chapter 14. Remember that for the practitioner exam, you're able to take your handbook into the exam, and to that extent, you're also able to make any additional notes or annotations or highlighting, for example, in the official manual with you. You obviously can't take any additional resources in anything other than the handbook, but you are able to make notes and annotations and highlights. So if you want to increase the sort of richness of information you have available, feel free to do that as we go or at the end. You'll also find a blank page every now and again, sort of between each chapter. It often makes a good place to put any additional notes. This is obviously the practitioner level that we're discussing. So we're assuming that you have either passed your foundation course or at the very least have completed the foundation level training. So we're not going to rehash or recover everything that we spoke about at the foundation level, but we will reference it. So if it's been a little while since you completed the foundation training, then I suggest going back to that foundation training and recapping, or at the very least, if you don't still have access to it, or you purchased a practitioner course on its own, ensure that you've looked at the foundation syllabus and the corresponding information in the manual that it covers. Predominantly at the process level, the purpose, objectives, and context of each process and the names of the activities. At practitioner level, we're going to drill down into the activities in a lot more detail and look at the actual recommended actions of each activity. So this is the starting up a project process. It's the first process to take place, and you'll recall that it is triggered by the provision of a project mandate. Now, that project mandate is provided by the commissioning organization or corporate program management or the customer. The starting up a project process is executed by both the project manager and the executive. And you may recall or have a look at least figure 13.1 in your manual, which is the overview of the entire Prince2 method, the one which is overlaid with the project management team management levels. And you'll recall that the starting up a project process is the one process which actually spans more than one management level. And so there is involvement in this process by both the project manager and the executive. And really, for a large number of the activities where the project manager is involved, the project manager will also be working collaboratively and engaging with the resources who will be fulfilling the roles ultimately of the senior user and the senior supplier, and of course working alongside the executive as well. Now, the primary output of the starting up a project process is the project brief, and the project brief will provide the project board with information, and it should be enough information or sufficient information at least for the project board to authorize initiation of the project. Remember that the purpose of the starting up a project process is simply to eliminate those poorly conceived ideas from ever getting any traction and moving forward, making sure that the right projects are being investigated any further, because the planning that we'll eventually get to and initiating and so on costs money. So we want to answer those questions of whether or not the project is viable and worthwhile, and we need to put together a document that provides that information in a concise fashion to the project board, and that document we call the project brief. And to a large extent, all of the activities that we're going to discuss in the starting up a project process contribute to the production of the project brief itself. Now, the amount of effort that will be involved in the starting up a project process will, of course, vary from project to project. And to a large extent, although there's exceptions to every rule, but to a large extent, the level of detail in the project mandate sort of governs the amount of effort that will be expended or that we'll go to in the starting up a project process. If the project mandate is the production of a very expensive feasibility study or something to that extent, then the starting up a project process is likely to be a bit more significant than if it was a cursory verbal mandate, if you like, from corporate to investigate this potential idea, for example. Now, if the project is part of a program, then the project brief will normally be provided from program management, and at the very least, quite often, the project board are likely to be pre-appointed. So let's have a quick look at an overview of the starting up a project process. So you've got the diagram in front of you, and then we'll go through these 6 activities one by one. Now, bear in mind that the starting up a project process is a process that happens once. It is triggered by the provision of the mandate, and once the activities of the starting up a project process have taken place, then the starting up a project process is finished. And so it's a use once only process. It will only ever happen once, and it will lead us to that first decision point where the project board have an opportunity either to say, yes, let's go ahead and initiate, or no, this doesn't look like a very good idea. Let's wait for a better mandate and rather invest our money in a better project. Okay, so let's have a quick overview of the entire process, and then we'll drill down on those 6 activities that make up the starting up a project process in more detail. So here we have the overview of the starting up a project process. This is figure 14.1 in your official handbook. You can see a couple of things here. One, the project mandate is provided by corporate program management or the customer. Remember, we said the commissioning organization provides the project mandate, and that effectively triggers the process. The process is then made up of these 6 activities. Appoint the executive and project manager. So the executive is appointed by corporate, and the executive then appoints a project manager. The balance of the process then will be executed collectively by the executive and the project manager. We've got to then capture previous lessons, design and appoint the project management team. We'll prepare the outline business case alongside selecting the project approach and assembling this project brief, which we said is ultimately the key product or the key management product which comes out of this process. Although it's not the only thing at all, because we still need to then plan the initiation stage. But all of that information, the project brief and the initiation stage, will be submitted to the project board along with the project manager's request to initiate a project, and that feeds into the directing a project process. So that triggers the directing a project process, and then the first activity of the directing a project process must then take place. Let's now take a look at the individual activities in more detail. So the first activity we're looking at then is shown in figure 14.2 in the Prince 2 manual, and that is to appoint the executive and the project manager. Now, we know that the project mandate is provided from corporate program management or the customer, the commissioning organization, and that triggers the starting up a project process. So that's shown here on the left-hand side. Now, anything on the left-hand side of these activities is information being considered. Anything on the right-hand side are outcomes, if you like, actions, things being produced or updated or assembled, and so on. So you can see the mandate is provided. The activity then takes place to appoint the executive and the project manager. We know from our discussion earlier that corporate program management or the customer are the ones who appoint an executive. So they will need to obviously establish the responsibilities for the executive, prepare a role description, and find a suitable candidate. Part of that will, of course, be estimating the time and effort required for the role so that they can confirm that the candidate is available and assign that person to the role. So we'll end up with an appointed executive and an executive's role description. That appointed executive will then have to do exactly the same as that for the project manager. In other words, establish the responsibilities, prepare a role description for them, identify suitable candidates, and confirm their availability based on the estimated time and effort required to fulfill the role, assign them to the role, and then confirm that appointment with corporate. So by the the end of that activity, if you like, or up to this point, we've now got an appointed executive, an appointed project manager, and each of them has a defined role description. Now, once the project manager has been appointed, the project manager will create the daily log. And as we've said before, the daily log is a defined management product. You will find it in Appendix A, if you want to go and have a look at one. We will later on in the module go through each of the most important management products in detail, but the daily log you can have a look at will. It doesn't necessarily have any prescribed format, and it can take a multitude it can be presented in a multitude of ways. It might be a pocketbook, it might be a spreadsheet, it might be entry in a project management tool. But the daily log is a log that will be used to record any informal issues, and at this point in time will also be used to record any other information that is not being collected elsewhere. And in particular, at this point in time, any risks that are identified will be captured in the daily log, and later in the process, or later in the initiating a project process, might be transferred to the issue register when one exists. So that's an example of where information that's not being collected elsewhere, there is no risk register. For now, it can reside in the daily log, and then when the risk register is produced, it can be transferred across. So just have a quick look now at this table of responsibilities, just for the purposes of seeing how these things function in the textbook. So you've got your products down the left-hand side. Now you've got your project mandate. The action was to provide the project management, and P is indicated here underneath corporate program management or the customer. That's saying that this document is produced by a corporate, effectively. You'll see the key at the bottom. P is the producer. They're responsible for the product's production. R is the reviewer, ideally independent of the production, and A is the approver. They confirm or they approve this product. So the project management, the project mandate is provided by corporate. The appointed executive is confirmed by corporate. The executive's role description is created by corporate. The project manager's role description is then created by the executive, but approved by corporate. The appointed project manager is created by, or is confirmed by, the executive and approved by corporate. And the daily log is created by P here, the project manager. So these tables of responsibilities can be quite informative as well, and when used in conjunction with the activity summary, give you a clear indication of everything that's happened on the right, who was responsible for doing it, and when read with those recommended actions, provide you with a very holistic overview of each activity. So that's the first activity. Let's look at the next one that takes place, and that is capture previous lessons. This is figure 14.3. Very straightforward one here, very little to talk about. On the left-hand side, we've got the previous lessons reports. So we'll consider any previous lessons related that may come from similar projects, identify any lessons that can obviously be applied to this project, which might include, for example, the results of audits and project reviews, review any lessons from corporate, from program management, from the customer, external organizations, if possible, consult with our peers and colleagues. And remember, we're looking to find out about similar projects, things that went well and things that didn't go so well. So things that we can repeat and things that we can try and avoid. And as far as possible, consult with any individuals or teams, peers and colleagues in order to extract this information. Now, once we've got this information, it has to be put somewhere. To that extent, the project manager will be responsible for creating the lessons log. So again, here on the right-hand side, lessons log is created, and we know this is done by the project manager. So up to this point, we've got a project manager and executive. The project manager has created the daily log, and the project manager and the executive will then actively seek lessons, speak to colleagues, peers, and so on. The project manager creates the lessons log, and we populate that lessons log with any of the lessons we have learnt so far. That takes us on to the next activity, which is to design and appoint the project management team. Now, a little bit more going on here. The thing I like about this is, in particular, figure 14.4 here, is it shows immediately the lessons log is now an input into the very next activity. So this is really embracing the learn from experience principle when we've just sat down and actively sought the lessons, captured them in a lessons log, and immediately we are using them to affect the very next activity. So basically, as part of designing and appointing the project management team, we would review the lessons log and determine whether there are any lessons related to the project management team structure. This might be a project of this size. Previously, the project manager had to do their own project support, and as part of the end project report, the project manager reported that they felt that impeded their ability to manage the project effectively. So learning from that experience, let's appoint a separate project support resource, someone to deal with the project administration entirely, and that might make this next project more effective. That's a sort of lesson that we could apply to this related team structure. So yes, of course, you'll see on the left as well, you've got the project brief that we know up until this point contains the executive and project manager's role description. We are updating the daily log with any issues, any related risks, or for example, we identify any risks, they'll be updated in the daily log. And we design the team. We effectively create role descriptions for each role that we identify. We create a project management team structure that's like an organogram, a structure showing all of the roles that are to be involved. And as far as possible, we might identify actual resources to fulfill those roles. Now, that might not always be possible, but if it's not possible to identify an actual person, then we might indicate the area of the organization where a resource might come from. So we're starting to build up, you see this part of the project brief, we're starting to build this project brief up now. We've now got a team structure, an organogram showing the structure of the team, and role descriptions for each identified role within the team. And again, project manager will need to estimate the time and the effort required for the fulfillment of each of these roles and identify, as far as possible, people to fulfill them. With regards to the responsibilities for this activity, you'll see that the table of responsibilities, table 14.3 in your manual, the project manager will obviously be updating the daily log. The project manager will create the project management team role descriptions, which will be approved by the executive. The project manager will create the team structure, again, which will be approved by the executive. And the executive will then appoint any members of the project management team, and that itself will be approved by corporate program or the customer. The next activity is to prepare the outline business case. Now, having a look at figure 14.5 again, you'll see the mandate on the left together with the lessons log. Any lessons relevant to the business case will need to be considered. And if you look on the right-hand side, you'll see we're obviously going to create the outline business case. And that's something that the executive will do in consultation with the senior user if they are appointed at that time. Now, the business case will detail, or the outline business case will detail what the project's objectives are, the reasons for doing the project, how the project will contribute towards corporate objectives, how the project's going to be funded. The project executive will obviously review any lessons, check any standards mandated for the format and presentation of the business case, and prepare it and present it. Whilst this is happening, the project manager will be creating the project product description. Now, the project product description, we said before, is a document that defines everything that the project needs to deliver in order for the customer to be happy that the project has delivered what they wanted. And so to that extent, it will define the customer's quality expectations and associated quality criteria or acceptance criteria. Now, this activity doesn't necessarily, from its name, it's not clear, it's not obvious from the name of the activity that the project product description is created at this point in time. So as far as just giving you a little tip here, perhaps one of the annotations you can make is to where this activity is written in the main overview diagram, where it says prepare the outline business case, just right underneath there, and the project product description, so that when you're looking at that diagram, you are reminded that the project product description also comes out of this activity. So the project product description describes what the project needs to deliver, defines the customer's quality expectations, relevant acceptance criteria for each of those expectations, and effectively, to some extent, or to a large extent really, defines the scope of the project and defines exactly what needs to be delivered at the end for the customer to be happy. In terms of the table of responsibilities, we know that the outline business case is produced by the executive. That will be reviewed by the senior user, the senior supplier, the project manager, and project assurance, and ultimately approved by corporate. Now, the project product description will be produced by the project manager, reviewed by project assurance to make sure that it meets the needs of the customer, and approved by the members of the project board. Remember, my project board represents the business, user, and supplier interests. Now, you'll note for the first time that the A for approve is shown here in brackets. Now, what that means is that this project product description will be approved by those relevant stakeholders, by the project board, but it will not take place during the execution of this activity in this process. It will in fact be part of a completely separate process. So the fact that it's in brackets means that it is approved by the board, but not now. It's done in another process. Well, which process can that possibly be? It's a project board's process, fairly obviously. It's going to be the directing a project process. So when you get to that activity in the directing a project process, you're going to find that the A's are written in standard format, but the P for produced will say it was produced by the project manager, but that P will be in brackets because it will have been produced in another process. That's what those brackets mean. And then obviously your daily log is updated always by the project manager. The next activity is select the project approach and assemble the project brief. Now, looking at figure 14.6 here, you'll notice that this is getting a little bit more robust. There's a little bit more content here on the left-hand side. Let's make some sense of exactly what's here before we look at the recommended actions. So what that's telling us is that the project brief is partly assembled. To date, or so far, we know that we've got the executive's role description, the project manager's role description, we've got the rest of the team's role descriptions, and we've got the project management team structure, the organogram. That came from our first couple of activities. In our most recent activity, we added the outline business case as well as the project product description. So our project brief is now coming together quite nicely and answering some very important questions. On top of that, on the left-hand side, we also are showing an input here being the lessons log. And that's because obviously we will consider any relevant lessons before we carry out any activity at all. So we've got the existing part of the project brief coming in together with the lessons log, and taking that into account, we can select the project approach and assemble the project brief. So the project approach essentially is the chosen manner in which the option selected in the business case is going to be delivered. So the business case will have looked at a number of different solutions to the problem and made a reasoned recommendation for one of them. The project approach is now a description of how we're going to deliver that solution. And there are essentially three possible project approaches to choose from. They are in-house, outsource, or off the shelf. In other words, deliver the solution ourselves, outsource the delivery of the solution to a specialist organization, or get an off-the-shelf solution, simply buy and install type arrangement. Now, we don't have to have one approach. There can be a combination. We can do some of the project ourselves, outsource some of it, and use an in-house or an off-the-shelf solution for the balance. But the project approach will need to be selected, and the project approach will be selected based on a number of things. We'll need to obviously consider any lessons relevant to that approach, consider any corporate standards that need to be applied, or any corporate customer standards that practices which should apply. Consider the current thinking about the provision of solutions within the industry sectors and any specialist skill areas that might be involved. Define the operational environment into which the solution will need to fit once it's complete. Consider any possible delivery approaches, their suitability for the project, risks associated with that, and so on, as well as any security constraints that will need to be applied, or that apply at least to the project and the operation of products. Any training that will be required, and so on. So with that in place, we will be able to select the most appropriate project approach. So here on the right-hand side now, you can see the project approach can be created, and that again is part of the project brief. Now, remember that the project approach is shown here in these dotted lines, meaning it's not a standalone product on its own, but rather part of another, as part of the project brief. Obviously, part of selecting an approach might mean that there would be additional roles identified. And again, if that is the case, then there would be additional role descriptions required at this point. The project brief can now be assembled. Okay, obviously we've got update the daily log that you're going to see pretty much everywhere as we go along. Update the daily log, but we've now got pretty much everything we need to assemble the project brief, and we are going to look at the project brief in the next section when we look at the management products. But essentially, the project brief needs to answer some very big questions. It needs to answer why are we going to do the project, what are we going to build, who is going to build it, and how are they going to build it. And so why are we doing the project? Well, the project brief will include the outline business case. What are we going to build? The project product description defines what. Who's going to build it? Well, we've got our team structure and our role descriptions. And how is it going to be done? We've got the project approach. So the project brief really is designed to answer those very big questions as to why, what, how, and who is going to deliver. So we assemble the project brief, we incorporate the outline business case, incorporate the project product description, incorporate the project approach, review the project management team structure, the role descriptions, and obviously use our daily log to keep track of any identified risks and obviously informal stuff the project manager is keeping track of. So let's have a look at this table of responsibilities now for this activity. So project approach created by the project manager. Additional role descriptions created by the project manager, the project brief assembled by the project manager, and the daily log will be updated by the project manager. So the project manager really responsible for a great deal of the activity happening during this activity. And then the final activity of this process is plan the initiation stage. So our project brief has been assembled. That's going to answer those big questions for the project board. Now we need to provide them with a quote, with an estimate, saying if you like this project brief, if you believe that the project has merit, then here's a quote, here's an estimate of how long it's going to take and how much it's going to cost to run an effective initiation stage. Because it's during the initiation stage where the detailed planning of the project will be carried out, where the definition of the project initiation documentation will take place, where the definition of all the management approaches will take place. And at the end of the initiation stage, we'll be in a much better position to determine whether or not this project really ought to go ahead. So this activity, plan the initiation stage, will take into consideration, you can see now on the left-hand side here, figure 14.7, will take into consideration what we know about the project in the project brief. We'll take into consideration any issues being dealt with, any risks identified that are captured in the daily log. We'll take into consideration any lessons relevant, and will basically help us create the stage plan. We'll plan the initiation stage, work out all of the activity that needs to take place during the initiation stage, estimate the time and the cost of doing that, and provide the board with a stage plan, which effectively is an estimate of the time and cost to execute the stage plan, as well as commitment to deliver certain outputs as well. Still, the project manager will be updating the daily log as we go along, and the project manager will then request authorization to initiate the project. And so that project manager's request to initiate will be submitted to the project board along with the initiation stage plan and a fully compiled project brief. The table of responsibilities here shows again the stage plan created by the project manager and the daily log updated by the project manager. So that's a good thorough look then at all of the activities in a little more detail that make up the starting up a project process. Now, as we went through that process, you'll notice we spoke about a number of the management products that are used in a Prince2 project. You'll recall, obviously, we had the project brief. We know that the project brief contains the project product description, the outline business case, and of course, we have our daily log and our lessons log. Now, the daily log and the lessons log you can find in Appendix A. Go and have a read about those. The format of those is quite generic. In fact, the daily log has no real prescribed format to any sort of significant degree. The project product description we'll take a look at when we cover the quality theme, and the outline business case has exactly the same format as the detailed business case. The only difference there is the level of detail contained in the document. So that we'll discuss when we look at the business case theme. But let's now take a look at the contents of the project brief together. So if you want to follow along as we go through these documents, you'll need to be in Appendix A. For the project brief, we're looking at entry A19. We know the purpose of the project brief is obviously to provide us with a full and firm foundation for the initiation of the project. And we know as well that the project brief will later be refined into a more detailed, comprehensive set of documentation called the project initiation documentation. But let's consider it in its current format. You're going to want to look under the composition heading, because this defines or describes all of the component parts of the project brief. So a project brief includes a project definition. This will explain what the project needs to achieve, including things like the background, the objectives, the desired outcomes, the project scope, exclusions, constraints, assumptions, tolerances, users, other known interested parties, and the project interface. It essentially provides a background as to the project, why it's needed, and so on and so forth. We will then include the outline business case. The outline business case, we know, sets out the reasons why the project is needed and will be developed into the detailed business case during the initiating a project process. The project product description, remember, will include the customer's quality expectations and acceptance criteria, and basically describes what the project needs to deliver for the customer to be happy. The project approach defines how we're going to deliver the solution that's been chosen from the business case. So in the business case, we described a number of options, and this approach says, well, we've selected option A, this is how we're going to deliver it. And you'll recall that the project approach is either to deliver the project in-house, outsource, or off the shelf. The project brief will also include the project management team structure. So this will basically be the organogram or a chart showing the structure of the team, and as far as possible identify individuals who will fulfill the roles, if that is possible at this stage. For each individual that makes up the project management team, remember, we'll include a role description that describe the roles that the project management team and other key resources will need to fulfill in order to complete their role. And then finally, a section in the project brief on references, which is including references to other documents. The terms of reference, for example, may be a reference document, or the project mandate, for example. So that's the contents essentially of the project brief. Remember that some of the documents, like the outline business case, like the project product description, they themselves are stand-alone documents that have their own defined structures and composition defined in Appendix A. But as I said earlier, we will describe those when we get to the relevant themes that they relate to. Now, let's have a look at some of the tailoring aspects of the starting up a project process and how it as a process can be tailored appropriately to suit different project environments. Now, in most of the Prince2 processes, and the starting up a project process is certainly no exception, the activities in the process are able to be combined, split, or can even run concurrently. Now, when this is done, it's important that we consider the integrity of the interface with any other processes. Since the starting up a project process interfaces with the directing a project process, care will obviously need to be taken to ensure that when the request to initiate a project is submitted, that all of the activities of this process have been completed and that the relevant outputs in terms of the management products in particular have been created and reviewed by that point in time. You know, it is hugely important so that when the project board meet to authorize initiation, that first activity of the directing a project process, that they have a comprehensive set of information at their disposal, so that at that point in time, they're able to make a relevant and informed decision. To that extent, you could preserve the final activity, plan the initiation stage as a final activity to be executed only when that balance of the process was complete. But you could combine the other activities within the process before and up to that point. Sometimes by this point in the project, certainly within the life cycle in any event, it may not necessarily be clear exactly what this project is going to be delivering. So in terms of the actual solution, the product. So it may be fairly difficult this early on to have a detailed or a comprehensive project product description. So at the very least, we should try and make sure that we have a clear understanding of exactly what business problem exists and what outcome is required that will solve that problem, or that will relieve the organization of that concern, essentially. Remember that some of the most important tailoring will be making sure that the management products used are appropriate. I mean, it's really no use having extensive and comprehensive project documentation if the project is so simple that more time will be spent on preparing management products than on creating the specialist products. Now, table 14.7 in the Prince2 manual provides some guidance on how the management products can be tailored. Now, you'll see if you look at the syllabus document that the table is specifically excluded from the content. However, there's real value in going through it, as it really does provide some practical ideas of how the management products can physically be tailored. Now, the daily log could literally be a pocketbook in its simplest form, an Excel spreadsheet, a Word document, or even maintained within a project management tool. The lessons log can be in any format. It can be as formal or as informal as the project requires. The project brief could, in its simplest form, simply be a statement describing the project, but of course may, at the other extreme, be a more comprehensive set of working documents referencing other corporate documentation, such as a feasibility report, for example. The team structure doesn't have to be complete at this point in time, so it can evolve as the project unfolds, and it can be built up and reviewed as the additional or the balance of the processes are executed. Role descriptions, again, contained within the project brief, these can be adjusted and presented really in any format. Even reference to existing role descriptions that are predefined in some type of organizational standard would be acceptable. The outline business case could be a simple description of why the project is needed, or may, of course, in a more complex and a more formal project, be a detailed and comprehensive financial analysis potentially. The project product description, again, may simply be a description of the desired outcomes if it hasn't yet been established exactly what solution is going to be developed to solve the business problem. And then finally, the initiation stage plan. Again, this could comprise any range of information presented really in a wide variety of formats. It might be a narrative document, it could be a presentation, it could be held totally or partially even within some type of planning tool. You know, from my perspective, I like to keep documentation simple, or at least to start simple. It's quite easy to add more detail as you go, rather than to start with a whole set of complex templates and documents that you're sort of scratching around for information to populate them with. Now, as far as the roles are concerned, remember that this process is happening pre-project, and depending on the organization, it may be the case that a project manager hasn't yet even been appointed to the project. And in this case, you may find that the executive will need to complete all of the work of the starting up a project process and create all of the products in the starting up a project process. But of course, they may, of course, and they're likely really to delegate much of that work to appropriate people within the organization, who would obviously then assist them with the creation of relevant management products. But if that is the case, we need to maintain a single point of accountability for each role, or for each person carrying out some type of duty on behalf of the executive in those circumstances. Okay, well, that wraps it up really for the starting up a project process. Don't forget to complete the relevant questions from the sample paper 1 in the resources area. Now, you may need to reread the scenario if you've had a break from your studies. And then don't forget to watch the rationale videos that take you through the answers, through the thinking behind the questions, and importantly, address some additional learning points. Once you've completed them, then come back and join me as we cover the next module.